All right, thank you for staying with us. Time for us to take a look at the dailies on Daybreak. Quite a lot of stories this morning, and we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. The lead story here talks about old Naira notes. Nigerians fear massive losses as deadline draws near. It has the riders that says business owners give January 25 deadline. Food prices soar as traders reject old notes. Now that's also another interesting rider, which we earlier mentioned in our opening. Family rejects old notes as bride price. So you may want to take details of that story. It's quite an interesting one. You'll find all the details on page 4 and 20. And then above that, you'd see NPC begins training of 786,741 workers for census on page 32. Excitement as Buhari commissions $1.5 billion Lekki deep sea port on page 3. You also have Ohaneze places 37 million naira bounty on IPOB leader Ekpa. On the pictorial, stranded passengers and striking aviation workers at the international wing of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Ikeja, in Lagos on Monday. You'd see the pictures there. And then below that, you would see the story that, basically explaining further. It says airlines count losses, passengers stranded as workers ground airports. On page 6, now at the footnote, crowd overwhelms security forces. Tinubu's rally to abrupt end. 662 killed, 2.4 million displaced by flood in 2022. NEMA DG. NIMET recovering, digitizing 130-year-old weather data. That's on page 23. Now, these are the major stories. Let's not forget that we still have 11 schoolgirls of FGC Breninia Wuri. It's been 588 days still in captivity. One student of Bethel Baptist High School, Kujama, 560 days still in captivity. We call for the release of the abducted.
And we move to the Daily Times newspaper. Starting from above the masthead, we see PDP approaches court to disqualify Tinubu from contesting presidential poll. Also below the masthead, we see Abuja lawyer Okpara challenges Buhari's power to extend IGP Alkali's tenure. Buhari to attend Dakar International Conference on Agriculture. You could find that story on page 3. Also, Ararume's 100 billion naira suit against Buhari. NNPC's 2 SANs walk out on court during hearing. And for the very glaring headline there, I've served Nigerians creditably, says Buhari. A couple of writers underneath says, I have not disappointed anybody. Inaugurates $1.5 billion Lekki deep seaport, rice mill, best staff lubricant plant in Lagos. And besides the pictorial, we see energy transition. FG seeks adequate climate finance through African carbon market. And on the footer, how NACO workers strike crippled airlines operations. Find that story on page 4. And that's it for the Daily Times.
All right, now let's take a look at the next paper there. Now we talk about the Leadership newspaper. Now on the Leadership newspaper, the lead story says more patients at risk as myths drain blood banks. You'll also find other stories above the masthead. Lekki Deep Sea Port targets $361 billion revenue, 200,000 jobs. FIRS rakes in 10.1 trillion naira in 2022, sets highest collection record. Esunupe confirms attendance at Leadership Conference. You also find Obi in Katsina vows to tackle poverty. All northern governors are behind Tinubu, says Lalong. $460,000 for feature. Atiku initiates court action against Tinubu. Diphtheria, Kano. 3 others record 123 cases and 38 deaths. These are the major stories on the leadership newspaper.
And for the Nation newspaper this morning, we remain non-partisan, INEC assures. Electronic transmission stays, that's according to the Independent National Electoral Commission. Beside that, court to DSS charge terrorist negotiator Tukur Mamu. Catch that story on page 5. Also, JAMB registers 92,490 candidates for UTME. FIRS nets highest ever revenue of 10.1 trillion. Catch those stories on page 5 and page 7, respectively. Excessive fasting destroys kidney, liver. NAFDAC warns farmers abducted. NAFDAC warns, rather, another story, farmers abducted in Osun. Interesting. For the banner headline, Buhari's declaration in Bauchi, Tinubu is incoming president. A couple of riders underneath that story. Why North should vote for ex-governor by Lawan Gbajabiamila. PDP abandoned region to Boko Haram. And also COVID-19, incoming travelers to provide vaccination evidence. And underneath that, stranded passengers lament 14-hour flight delay. And also beneath the pictorial, we see $1.5 billion Lekki deep sea port will boost economic recovery, says president. And on the footer, gunmen behead council administrator. Ex-Osun Amotekun boss alleges threat to life. And that's all for the Nation newspaper.
All right, on the Punch newspaper this morning, the lead story talks about power outage disrupts APC rally, stops Buhari, Tinubu's speeches. The writer says APC National Working Committee to probe incident says Bauchi rally successful. Buhari supporting Tinubu, direct governors to ensure victory, says Bagudu. You have above the masthead, cash swap, CBN bars, Abuja, Lagos, POS operators. Now you have FG forecast fresh flooding in Plateau, Bayelsa, and others. You also have other stories below the pictorial. Lagos projects jobs as president opens rice mill and seaport. And then below that, Nigerians now have alternative to PDP and APC, says Kwokwoso. Our abductors working for highly connected people. FUNAB graduate. You have diphtheria. FG deploys response team as cases arise. So these are the major stories on the Punch this morning.
For the Nigerian News Direct, we start from the very top. FIRS breaks 2021 record, collects 10.1 trillion naira in 2022. Besides that, WHO has not informed us of any deadly Chinese flu, according to the minister. Nigeria hosts Regional Digital Economy Conference. And also, Lekki Deep Sea Port, FG targets $360 billion investment as Buhari unveils largest rice mill in Africa. $360 billion investment avenue for economic vitality, employment opportunity, according to NIMASA. And also, we are ready for standard regulations. But that's according to the NPA and the Shapers Council. You see a picture there of President Muhammadu Buhari commissioning some projects in Lagos on Monday. And underneath the pictorial, I have served Nigerians creditably. President Buhari in Bauchi as he campaigns for the APC. And underneath that story, we see a couple others. PMS, amid pricing challenges, Nigerians paid average of 206 naira per litre. That's according to the National Bureau of Statistics. Also, salary increment, aviation workers ground international flight operations. And lastly, curbing indecent dressing on Nigerian campuses through strict regulations, sanctions. That's it for the Nigerian News Direct this morning.
All right. Let's get perspectives on some of these stories. We have our guest reviewer in the studio, Dr. Theophilus Abba. He's the director, Daily Trust Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Well, it appears this is your first time of joining
first
us
time here
on the
this year,
Daybreak.
so
Yeah. Happy New Year indeed.
Welcome to the show once again.
thank you.
A lot of interesting stories. Today being the 24th, we are counting down to the last day of the use of the old Naira notes. We are phasing it out, as a matter of fact, and quite a lot is been happening, and crises seem to be looming. As a matter of fact, we are hearing that a family is already rejecting the old notes as a bride price somewhere in Niger State. So let's get your take on this fears. Are these legitimate fears?
I think there are legitimate fears concerning the access to the new Naira notes. From a personal experience, yesterday I went to a bank and I wanted to withdraw money. And most of the ATM machines, they didn't have cash. And the ones that had cash, about two of them, one was dispensing 200 Naira notes, and you can't withdraw more than 2,000 at once. And then the other ones that had 500 Naira notes, there was just a long queue. And while we were, on that queue to withdraw, he said temporary out of, unable to dispense cash. Now, people were moving from one ATM machine to another. There we have several banks. So from bank A, you move to bank B, you move to bank C. People are desperate. They want to withdraw cash, and these, ATM machines are not dispensing the new Naira notes. Now, then you now talk about, those who do business. There's pressure on Nigerians to dispose of the old Naira notes. We call it old, even though until January 31st, it will still be relevant. And so people are taking old notes to them, and they're saying, look, if I collect these old notes, how am I going to convert them to the new notes? So I am thinking that it is very, very necessary for the CBN to reconsider the January 31st deadline, because unless the measure is punitive, unless the measure to say, okay, we want Nigerians to lose, want Nigerians to lose their cash, unless that is the intention of the new Naira note, then there's no reason why people should be made to suffer, because even the banks who are supposed to dispense these new Naira notes don't do so. As at last week.
Exactly. So you wonder where the missing link is. Is it? Central bank will say, well, we have given out the monies to commercial banks, but if you go to the bank, they tell you
get the old Naira notes.
So where is the missing link? What exactly is going on? And let's not forget that rejecting the monies as legal tender before the expiry is illegal, actually, as a matter of fact.
It's illegal, but I think my concern is the relationship between the CBN and the banks. For instance, I understand the CBN is going from state to state and doing swap, Naira swap and things like that. There's no way they can, do that satisfactorily.
Exactly.
It is only through these banks. And if these banks don't have enough cash, if they don't have enough, or not cash now, enough new notes, they will not give to customers. So I'm thinking that instead of the CBN, to threaten Nigerians, with, look, you're going to lose your money, they have to, ensure that they cure whatever is the disease between them and the banks. Because these banks are not dispensing these new Naira notes. Because I was thinking that they'll flood the ATMs with the new Naira note. So if you go to the bank and you want to withdraw cash, you withdraw the new Naira notes. But people are frustrated. I went to up to 4 banks yesterday before I was able to withdraw 10,000. From bank A, I drove to bank B. The whole place, there are no Naira notes. So, there are no cash in the ATM machines. Now, from what I know, this is not how it is done in other parts of the world. For instance, in the UK, there is a change of the currency because you have a new king.
I
understand?
Yes.
And they are already redesigning the currency, and they are already trying to inject the new pounds to the economy. And it will take a long time. It's not something that you do in the space of 1 month, 2 months. They allow this thing to phase out naturally. That means that if you take your cash to the bank, the old notes to the bank, you're going to get new notes.
Okay.
And so you're going to spend the new notes. But in our own case, we say it must be done in 1 month, in 2 months, and if not, you're losing all your money. As if the idea is to make people to lose. I don't know why the CBN is making so much.
This brings me to the question. You know, Nigerian banks are yet to recover from the challenges experienced from the COVID-19 pandemic, because you see, after the pandemic, queues have been lingering in these deposit money banks for the longest time due to a plethora of issues faced by, customers over the years. Till now, if you go to some banks, you still see canopies with people sitting in queues and waiting to, get attended to. Now, that's first. Secondly, don't you think that this is only going to add to the challenge that these banks already face as it is? And finally, is it fair to put this on Nigerians, especially now? We know that the month is about to end, salaries are going to be paid, and we know what happens when it is the end of the month and salaries are paid. There's going to be an influx of people also going to the bank. So if you add this number of people who will be going to make cash withdrawals to the number of people who will be going in droves, to make deposits at the banks, because of course everybody wants, the new notes. Now, don't you think it is going to make an uneven balance and just add so much pressure to the system and would push, the CBN? I don't want to say they would be forced to, move the deadline, but do you foresee that happening?
Well, I mean, there is already, kind of chaos, There's already chaos, as far as accessing these notes is concerned. And I don't really know what has happened. It's either that the CBN did not print enough new Naira notes, or perhaps the banks have some technical reasons why they are not picking them up from the CBN. Maybe there are charges they need to pay, or I don't know. I'm not a banker. But the major issue is that, like you mentioned, there is already chaos. People are already feeling the pains.
Panicking.
People are already panicking. There's no access. The new Naira notes are not circulating the way we expect it to circulate. And so I'm appealing, let me put it this way, that the CBN has to extend, the deadline. That is number one. Then secondly, the CBN had to evaluate what has happened in the last 1 or 2 months when they talked about, people changing their own Naira notes for new. They have to go and evaluate, find out what has happened. They have to review, so that if there are issues, they have to correct them. Because Nigerians must not be made, to suffer because of the inefficiency of the banking sector. If the CBN is not doing the right thing, it has to ensure that it corrects some of it. Because if I have cash, let's assume I have 100,000, and I cannot, I cannot exchange it at the counter, or if I go to the bank and I still withdraw the old Naira note, or if I go to the bank and I cannot withdraw the new Naira note, it will hurt my operation. It will affect what I can do. So maybe in the rural areas, they have taken some cash there. But there are so many rural areas that don't have banks. For instance, my own local government, there's no single bank in my local government in Kogi State, where I come from.
I think the Yobe State governor was...
Yeah, there's not even one bank.
Out of 17 local
only
three has banks.
So if there are no banks in that local government, then how would people with cash, who have cash, how would they dispose of, how would they exchange those cash, the old notes?
How effective would the cash swap
program?
Yesterday they launched something they call the cash swap.
It's too late.
Program.
Yes,
we have barely 7 days to go.
You have a few days to go, and which means that everyone who has cash, because in the rural areas you do business in cash. If I send any money to anybody in the rural area, you just go and withdraw.
So that should have started much earlier.
From a POS operator, and keeps. Because most of them, the money is not so much, so you need to keep that cash to be able to run your life.
So, Doctor, shouldn't the CBN have used these said POS operators? Isn't it possible for them to do some sort of registration and documentation of some of these POS operators, to ease access to this cash? When you have them registered at the commercial banks, these commercial banks can then give them the new notes in bulk. That way, they can go to their various localities and communities and help do these exchanges in representation of these banks
instead of the CBN going directly.
Don't you think this would help?
It would have helped, but essentially, you see, withdrawing the old Naira note should be a gradual process. You know, it's not something that should be done overnight. If you rush it, Nigerians will lose. And every Nigerian that has a naira now labored for that money. You know, labored for that naira. So if you now say, oh, well, we're giving you so and so deadline, my bank did not, it's the business between you and your bank, not the CBN is not concerned, you're going to lose so much. Nigerians will lose. So I'm advocating, like Zulum has advocated, that there has to be an extension. And we call on the National Assembly and other stakeholders to prevail on the CBN to extend this deadline. If not, millions of Nigerians will lose what they have earned in naira.
All right, now let's take a look at some other stories this morning. We are also hearing about a possible flood. The federal government is forecasting that there's likely to be fresh flooding in Plateau, Bayelsa, and others. And this is as they also review new figures regarding the 2022 flood, that 662 people were killed in that flood, 2.4 million people were disabled. And we are also seeing NIMED talk about NIMED recovering, digitizing 130-year-old weather data. So, I mean, put these stories together. What should we be expecting in the coming days as regards disaster as such as the floods?
Well, there is what we say in the church. You say the okay. Let me not go into. You see, we have been experiencing flood, you know, and most times NIMED will predict that this will happen, and then we now notice that people are left to their fate. You know, over the years, you know, I remember the 2012 flood. After the flood, what the federal government did then was to say, okay, they will have to put in place measures that will prevent a recurrence. And that meant building a dam, a huge dam along that waterway. The dam that can conserve water, which can now be used for other purposes. Example, dry season farming. You know, I remember Jonathan, you know, when he was in government, talked about that. And we heard about dredging of the River Niger, you know, and a lot of money was pumped into the dredging of River Niger. And up till now, I mean, last year was a decade after, these things didn't happen. You know, you see, the flood in Lokoja last year shouldn't have happened if the River Niger were properly dredged. Even when you talk about the river the Bayelsa has been if the dam that was projected had been built, that wouldn't have happened. You know, we know that these are issues. We know that these are problems that will occur. You see, and I've not looked at the 2023 budget closely, but I don't know what measures are put in place. I don't know the plans in the budget, you know, to ensure that flooding is dealt with. Because flooding will not go away. You understand? There will continue to be flood in Nigeria. And if we do nothing about it, if we don't dredge the rivers, if we don't build dams to conserve the water and to use it for other purposes, if the way we build our cities, you know, is such that there are no proper drainages.
It doesn't seem like any of the top 4 presidential candidates is talking about this. Really.
Sincerely, my concern, I think a student was raising an issue it was in the university when Kwankwaso went there, and he was saying that, look, there's issue of climate change. Nobody is talking about climate change. Nobody is talking about flood. I think the student mentioned this. Nobody is talking about flooding, and this is an issue. If you know, some communities have been washed away. You understand? Some of them, they lost everything, and nobody cares for them. And then we are going to experience another one.
So we need to go beyond this prediction.
Yes, it's not about predicting. We want to see deliberate steps being taken by government to prevent people from suffering again. Because I'm thinking that the low-hanging thing to do is to dredge River Niger. If you dredge the River Niger, you see, it means that it will have more depth, and then water will flow. You know, but if it is just there at the surface, you have sand cover the whole place, and the communities will be swept away. And that is what we will experience for over a decade now. But we are not taking steps. We are just talking about, it will happen, then it will happen. So there's no profit in the prediction.
Okay, so yesterday, passengers were stranded at the Muritala Mohammed International Airport due to, an unexpected strike by the Nigerian Airlines handling company, NACO. So what would you say? I mean, first of all, this is a revisit to the aviation industry. First, we had the issue of aviation fuel, and it caused a hike in the price of airfares. And now we're having, this unexpectedly. How would you react to that?
Sincerely, I think it's a big embarrassment because an airline, the aviation workers shouldn't be seen to be going on strike.
I mean, the flight was made to travel back to the UK yesterday.
Yes. So it shouldn't. It's not the kind of thing that should happen in our country, in Nigeria, because the authorities, they knew, maybe they had been given a notice that, look, we are going on strike if you don't do this. And I was thinking that, those the management of NACO and other agencies who are related to NACO, they ought to have call the union workers to a round table and say, look, these are the issues. You need salary increment. Well, it's not something we can afford now, but this is what we can afford. You see, if you are realistic in negotiating with labor union, they will understand. They won't go on strike. But this idea of allowing labor unions to go on strike every time they threaten to go on strike.
I was going to ask that question. Why does it have to get to the point of industrial action for the government to notice the plight or the complaints or the yearnings of these workers? I mean, we've seen it time and time again with the Academic Staff Union of Universities. We've seen it with polytechnics and the likes of that. Why does it have to get to industrial action and getting to national embarrassment before the government takes?
I think that has to do with poor planning. For instance, you see, most times when labor unions go on strike, it's usually because they will have had an agreement with either the government or the management of the institution that, look, this is going to happen by so and so date. Then we now discover that the management will not do what it ought to do. For instance, Academic Staff Union should not go on strike if government had, factored in all the agreement they have reached with ASU in the annual budget. Now, but you have an annual budget that, it's usually a deficit budget now. We are now used to deficit budget. Yet, all the things that ASU has talked about, most of them legitimate. I think if you are not a lecturer, if you never lecture, you will not understand, how ASU feels. Most of them are legitimate, and government will just ignore it and say, well, they are poor teachers.
So, sir, then is it lack of poor planning or lack of political will?
Well, I think it's planning. It has to do with planning because you have to budget. You have to make the budget. You have to include, the salary increment in the budget, which will be approved by the federal government, by the National Assembly at the time. So if it is not done, it means that there is no proper planning. Because the budget process is that, you have to, take into account what the obligations are when you are submitting whatever is the budget of your agency to the budget office. So if you ignored your agreement with the labor union or the labor union in your organization, if you ignore that agreement, it means that you didn't plan properly. Maybe not exactly political will, but it is poor planning, poor budgeting process. I think those are. But what I'm saying that aviation workers should not go on strike because it is not just about flying. It is about the image of your country. If anybody is coming to Nigeria, maybe to do business, I hear that aviation workers are on strike. Even if it is once that is disappointed, the next time you ask him to come to Nigeria to come and do investment, you say no, the aviation workers are always going on strike. They will not even bother to find out whether, it was only once in a century. You say no, they're always going on. The last time I wanted to go to Nigeria to do this business, the aviation workers was. I don't want to be stranded in that country. Yeah. You understand?
All right. Well, unfortunately, we have to end the discussion at this point. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Theophilus Abba is the director of the Daily Trust Foundation. He is a reviewer for today. We'll take a short break, and then when we return, top of the hour will be headlines again.
But in a situation where you find that